Hi everyone, welcome to a new interview for Ártico de los Libros. Today we have the pleasure to be with Tom Hindle. For anyone who doesn't know Tom Hindle is a bestseller British author, best known for his intricate murder mysteries. His meticulous plotting, vivid characterization, and the pacing of his story have earned well-deserved comparisons to Agatha Christie and Anthony Horowitz. And we can tell that he has paid homage to the golden age of detective fiction while offering also like a modern twist to it. And your debut novel, A Fatal Crossing, published in 2022, was an instant success. And you cemented your reputation with The Murder Game, Murder on Lake Garda, and Death in the Arctic, and as well as A Killer in Paradise that will be released next year in English as well. So
Yes.
my first question, and well, first, if you want to briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me first. It's great to be speaking with you. Yeah, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I think you summed it all up pretty perfectly. But yeah, no, I'm Tom. I write murder mysteries. I just they're just such fun to write. You know, writing. I love playing games and I love puzzles and that sort of thing. So yeah, writing these murder mysteries is something I take a lot of pleasure in. And yeah, it's I'm very glad people seem to be enjoying them. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, my first question is related to that because I'm curious to know about what first drew you to writing this classic style whodunits.
Yeah, I think I've always loved mysteries. You know, all through my reading life, you know, I've always been drawn to books that have lots of clues and lots of suspects and a big twist at the end. Um, but I think if you had told me when I was a kid that one day I would be writing crime, I think I would probably have been quite surprised. So I knew I wanted to be an author when I was a kid. I used to write a lot of my own stories, and you know, I loved coming up with characters and worlds. Um, but I read a lot of fantasy. I read a lot of spy fiction. Like you mentioned, Anthony Horowitz there. So I loved his Alex Rider books about the teenage spy. So I read all that. I read a lot of that sort of thing. And again, I was a child of the '90s, so you know the Harry Potter books were the biggest thing in the world, and that's the kind of thing I read when I was a kid. Um, so I think if you'd said to me then one day you're going to write crime, you're going to write murder mysteries, I think I might have been a bit surprised. I think I would have expected that maybe I would write fantasy. But actually, looking back, I realised that all of my favourite stories were mysteries, and I think you know it's one of the reasons that murder mysteries and whodunits are so enduring is they fit into lots of different genres. As long as you have clues and suspects and a big reveal, it works. So yeah, looking back now, I might not have read lots of crime novels, but I was always reading mysteries. You know, even when I was a really little kid, like my favorite cartoon was Scooby Doo. You know, and yeah, I really believe every episode of Scooby Doo is a perfect 20-minute murder mystery. I remember watching kind of Midsummer Murders and reading all these different books that, as I say, were mysteries. So yeah, I think if you'd somehow gone back and told me 20 years ago that I one day I'd be writing murder mysteries, I might have been a bit surprised. But actually, it makes all the sense in the world because yeah, I've always loved mysteries. I love puzzles. I love games, anything like that. So yeah, it suits me quite well, I think.
Yeah, and about that, is there one book that you say, oh, this like about for the authors or the movies or the series you just mentioned? Is there one book that I don't know, Agatha Christie or something that told you like, oh, like I should write something like this, a specific one, or maybe your reference?
Yeah, so I think the one I would probably choose for that is Magpie Murders, which is another Anthony Horowitz book. So I read Magpie Murders when I was 24. I got it for Christmas, and for anyone who hasn't read it, it's a book of two halves. So and the first half is very Agatha Christie. You know, the vicar's been murdered on the day of the local vegetable competition, kind of thing. And I remember reading that and thinking, I want to have a go at this. I want to try writing one of these myself. And I'd already had the idea for a Fatal Crossing a few years earlier. So I actually had the idea for that when I was at school, but I hadn't really done much with it. I was going to try and write it up as a play, and I didn't succeed in that. I think I wrote about half of the play, and then we all finished school and went off to university. But I had the idea there, so the idea was already in my head, and then I read Magpie Murders, and I can remember reading that and thinking, do you know what? With some adjustments, A Fatal Crossing, it's not a play; it could be a crime novel. And so, yeah, that is the kind of, if there was to be one book that set me on this path, it would probably be that one.
And I'm also curious to know that, well, I guess your routine must have changed through the years, but what does your typical writing day looks like now, like in nowadays?
Yeah, you're right. It has changed pretty much with every book, actually. Every Because I've been in a slightly different place in my life with every book. But the routine right now, so I have a daughter. She's 1 year old. So most days I wake up very early with her. I spend the first kind of hour of the day making breakfast and playing with her and hanging out, and then I take her to nursery. And then while she's at nursery, I get my work done. So I start the day by kind of doing emails and admin and just clearing out anything that needs doing, any jobs that need doing. And then usually around sort of the middle of the morning, I'll start writing, and I'll write. I try not to stop because I think writing is all about momentum. I think once you kind of, if it's going well, then I think taking a break is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
So I try and get off to a good start, and I'll try and then write kind of through to the middle of the afternoon. And then at the middle of the afternoon, I'll stop and I'll pick up any more emails or jobs and things like that that have come through. And then towards the end of the day, I go and bring my daughter home, and that's me for the day. So sometimes actually after she's gone to bed, I will stay up in the night and I'll do a bit more work if I've got a deadline or if something's just going really well. But yeah, that's my day at the moment. So yeah, very very different to my routine with my very first book, which was, I was still working full time, and I used to just write that 2 evenings a week on Monday and Wednesday evening because I had the flat to myself. My wife was at the gym those nights. So yeah, very very different routine now over the years.
Yeah, and I also want to know how long does it usually take for you to complete a draft of a novel? I guess it also varies between each book.
Yeah, I think a first draft usually takes me about 6 months. So I tend to start it in the summer, and I have to send it to my editor at the end of the year. And then so about 6 months to get that first draft, and then we have another 6 months of editing and going for a few more drafts there and proofreading it and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's about 6 months drafting and then about 6 months editing.
Okay, and one another thing that I'm always like really surprised about the books is the setting of your books. For
Mm.
example, like for Mother in Lake Garda, Asesinato en el lago de Garda in Spanish, that we published at the beginning of this year. You set the story in a private island and you focus on the influencer concept up as well. Like, why did you choose these elements to build the story?
So the island came, I guess, through necessity. So the idea was originally to have the book take place in a real castle that is not on the island, but is actually on the shore, on the mainland, beside Lake Garda. And what I realized was it wasn't enclosed enough. It was anyone could have come and gone. It would be really easy for the police to just turn up and take over and for them to solve the mystery. And it just wasn't quite working. So I thought, okay, I need to remove this castle somehow and put it somewhere. And then, of course, we're dealing with a lake. So immediately I thought, let's take the castle and put it on an island, which, felt very fitting. There is a tradition, I think, in murder mysteries of houses and castles and things on islands. So I enjoyed doing an island. So we had that separation there. The police couldn't just, walk in. And you knew it had to be someone in the castle because no one has seen a boat coming or going from the island, so the murderer has to be there somewhere. So that worked really well. As for the influencer concept, So I worked in PR, and I worked in PR for about 8 years, and so I was quite familiar with the world of influencers. I spent a lot of time kind of working with them, so there's probably a bit of me bringing in just something I know. But then as well, I guess uh, I'd say the book started with the idea of just a glamorous wedding in an Italian castle, and the next question there is, well, who is getting married? And I thought this kind of it looked like an influencer wedding. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just so
Yeah.
beautiful. It's so
The
glamorous.
glamour. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. I thought, that I could totally imagine this being the wedding of an influencer. And as well, something I really enjoy doing is kind of taking the Agatha Christie kind of structure of a book and the way she did things and trying to find a modern spin on it. So rather than someone finding a secret note in a drawer or something, you see a deleted Instagram post or like a comment or something on an Instagram post that someone has tried to hide. And, working with an influencer and social media, there's a lot of potential for that kind of storytelling. So, yeah, I think I'm trying to remember. I think I had the idea quite early on that one of either the bride or the groom was going to be an influencer, and it just really worked. So yeah, I ran with it.
Yeah. And also, we'll keep talking about the setting. And for Death in the Arctic, Muerte en el Ártico in Spanish, the setting is on a luxury airship bound for the North Pole. And the characters are basically trapped. They are in a remote region, they are cut off from any rescue and under extreme conditions. And why setting a murder mystery in the Arctic?
So that one actually started with the airship, and the Arctic came later. So, I mentioned I worked in PR. So, one of my clients for about 6 years was a big American tire company called Goodyear. And Goodyear has an airship in America. They call the Goodyear Blimp, and they fly it over NASCAR races and Super Bowls, and it's essentially a big floating billboard. And as a bit of a stunt, they brought it over to the UK. They were going to fly it over some races here in the UK and for a few days over London. And I was involved because I was part of their PR team then, they were a client of mine. I was very heavily involved in the media activity and the social media and the marketing. And so I had to learn a lot about airships. And I had written A Fatal Crossing at this point, and I was looking for interesting places to set other murder mysteries. And as I learned about airships for my work with Goodyear, I realized, oh my goodness, this would be an amazing place to set the murder mystery. It's in the sky, no one can get away. They're very glamorous, as you say. Like, the airships that flew 100 years ago, they had restaurants and cabins and viewing galleries and bars. Like, it was amazing that these things flew, in the sky. And so I knew I wanted to do something on an airship. The problem I had was the airships mostly flew in the 1920s and 30s, and quite often they would fly back and forth between the UK and America, or Europe and America. And I had already done a murder mystery set in the 1920s on a journey to America, so it was just too similar. So I parked the idea. I kept the idea of an airship in the back of my head, and I thought I'd come back to it later when I'd worked out how to do it. And I went and wrote The Murder Game and Murder on Lake Garda. And a few things changed then. One was I started seeing articles about airships coming back as a modern means of transport. So that brought me around to the idea of maybe I do this as a modern story rather than a historical story. And then the other thing that happened was I wrote Murder on Lake Garda. Now, Murder on Lake Garda is set in Italy. It's set somewhere very hot. By the time I'd finished it, I was fed up of writing about people being hot, and I wanted to write about somewhere cold instead. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to send my airship to the Arctic, and it's going to be a modern airship in 2025. And then one more thing happened actually. After I'd had that idea of an airship in the North Pole, I learned that the North Pole actually has a history of airship travel. So the very first, this is real life, real life. The very first successful expedition to the North Pole was made in 1926 by airship. Um, So they tried it by sea and they tried it by land, and they just couldn't do it. It was too far. The conditions were too harsh. But because an airship can stay in the sky for days at a time, the airship could do it. So when I realized, that there was the history as well, and that we were coming up on the 100th anniversary of that, I just realized, yeah, this is perfect. Airship, North Pole. Let's do that. And so that's where it came from.
And so we can say that it's like the perfect winter read. We can
Yeah,
say.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Meanwhile, Murder Lake Garda is more of like a summary
Yeah.
vibes books. I feel like Death in the Arctic would be a really good novel to read, between the blankets during winter.
Exactly. Hot drink. Yes.
Yes. I also wanted to ask you, like, you always visit the places you set your novels on, right? For example, like Lake Garda, you
Yeah.
visited before, like to research about it. And how was it? How was the experience?
It was great. We actually, so I had the idea for the book while we were there. So my wife and I were on holiday in Lake Garda, and I think it was on the second day of our holiday, we went into the real castle, and we saw into one of the courtyards in this castle that there was a wedding taking place. And I remember looking at that wedding and just seeing the glamour of the ceremony and the castle walls and the lake behind it, just thinking, oh my goodness, that right there is an amazing opening scene for a murder mystery. So yeah, we were already there when I had the idea, and I spent the rest of the week thinking about it and thinking about what the story was going to look like, and making notes and taking lots of pictures. So that kind of became my research trip, and yeah, it was brilliant. I mean, it's a wonderful place to be. Of course, how can you be by Lake Garda and not be happy? So I was enjoying being there, but I think going to these places just makes such a difference, because you I mean, you can look at pictures online and you can look at videos and you can read about these places, but actually being there and speaking to people and eating the food and experiencing how hot actually is it? Is it hot, or is it uncomfortably hot? Is it comfortable? Swimming in the lake, all this sort of stuff. It's stuff that you can bring to the book, and it might not be. It might not make it into a story, but it all adds textures to the book and color and yeah. So I think it's very valuable getting to spend time there. And Lake Garda is a lovely place, so it was a good time.
Yeah. So in this case, we can say that for Murder Lake Garda, it started with the setting, and then you developed the crime, right? So it was first the setting and then the crime. But for the other books, is it normally like first the crime and then you write the setting or decide the setting, or it's like a combination of both, or it's also first the setting, like you said, as you thought about like in the Arctic, you also thought about the topic, but you didn't want to mix it with the other book. So how does it start normally?
Yeah, it starts with the setting, and
Okay.
then the crime kind of comes after that. So yeah, so as I say, with Lake Garda, so I had the idea of a wedding in a castle, and as I say, the next question then is, who's getting married? Who are these people? And then once you have answered that question, it becomes okay. Who are the people around them? So at a wedding, you have a best man, you have bridesmaids, you have the two families coming together. So I spent time working out who all of these characters were going to be. And then I spent a lot of time working out what the relationships between these characters were. So, who is friends with who hates who loves who knows whose secrets, and you begin to create sort of like a community almost of these characters, and you get to know who they all are and what they all mean to each other. And that tends to be at that point when I start to think about the crime. So I usually know who is going to die quite early on. So, and I think the way I work that out is I ask myself, who is the worst possible person that could be murdered? And in Lake Garda, of course, the answer is the bride. I don't think there is a worse person at a wedding who could be murdered than the bride. So I work out quite early on who is going to be murdered, and then I try really hard to find a way of doing it that feels unique to that location. So, in Murder on Lake Garda, the murder weapon is it's a dagger, but it's a dagger from the castle, and it's got this, it's been designed in Venice, and it's got all this history surrounding it, and just trying to looking for ways to make everything really evocative of the setting. In Death in the Arctic, um, the victim is murdered with helium. So the airship is lifted by helium. So I thought, well, there you go. That where else could you do that in a murder mystery? So I try really hard to look for ways of making sure the murders feel quite unique to the settings.
And
But yeah,
you
yeah.
have done a good job with that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of fun trying to work with it. It's tricky. And I go on a lot of long walks trying to work out what the answer is going to be and how it's all going to come together. But once you get it, and you kind of hit on the idea that is the right idea, then everything kind of falls into place. It all becomes a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I also wanted to talk about Death in the Arctic. The darkness and the silence of the Arctic feels almost like a character itself on the novel. What do you think are the key points when writing that kind of like claustrophobic atmosphere?
Oh, yeah, I think someone read one of my first books. I read A Fatal Crossing and said you really get the sense of a cat on a hot roof. And the roof is just sort of heating up, and the cat is kind of desperate to get away. Like it's not a nice image, but it's stuck with me. I hadn't heard that expression before, but I try really hard now when I'm writing these settings to kind of to think of that and to remember that and to kind of get that feeling. So I think it's important that everything has to start off quite happily. Everyone has to be kind of having a good time. Everything has to be going well. And I think it's about building that sense of claustrophobia really slowly. So just going from a place where everyone is happy and feels safe, to slowly, slowly, slowly getting to a point where everyone is terrified and desperate to get away, and just building that atmosphere gradually, I think, is important. I think if you were to rush in with it, somehow I don't think it would be as effective. But I think if you see things slowly starting to fall apart, then that helps. I think as well, it's about making it really clear to the reader why these people are trapped. I think if a reader is able to say, well, why couldn't they just do that? Then, or why couldn't they just escape by doing this? Or then I think you lose the claustrophobia. But I think if the reader really understands these people are trapped, they cannot get away. They are in the sky over the North Pole. There's no one around for hundreds of miles. What are they supposed to do? Then I think that really helps as well. And it comes through in the characters too. So yes, I think those are kind of some of the ways I try and do that. But I mean, the North Pole just lends itself perfectly to it. Once you're up there, you really are just miles from nowhere. I mean, I think we say in the books, the North Pole it's about miles north of the town they set out from, which is called Longyearbyen. So that's 800 miles. That's quite a distance. And when you go out to Longyearbyen, it is itself the world's northernmost town. It's a long way from kind of it's part of Norway. Is Longyearbyen. You're still a very long way from somewhere like Oslo. It's so I think just trying to really communicate to the reader and make sure the reader understands these people are in the middle of nowhere. No one is coming to help them. And one of them has to be a murderer because you can't get off the airship. So, yeah, I think just making it really clear what the stakes are. And then I think the reader brings their own sense of claustrophobia to it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, we can say that then isolation and trust are major themes in Death in the Arctic.
Yeah.
So, what did you want to explore about human nature in this kind of extreme situations, and like the fact that there could be vulnerability as well, even among luxury?
Yeah, I think what did I want to explore about human nature? I think the important thing, something I need to make clear, I think, is when I'm first writing these things, I'm writing a puzzle. So I'm writing with the intention of writing something that's going to be entertaining and that works as a murder mystery. And I think what tends to happen is you get to the end of a first draft and you're just relieved, but it all works and then it all makes sense. And you look back on what you've done, and that is when you start to see themes coming through. So yeah, I think you end up surprising yourself a little bit what you've written about. So you write your murder mystery when you look back and you realize, oh my goodness, yeah, I have written a novel here about isolation and about people being desperate and about the sort of the awful things people will do in these sorts of circumstances. So you end up surprising yourself a little bit with those themes. So I'm not sure if it's a case of I brought those ideas to it. I think what I wanted to do was write a fun murder mystery on an airship over the North Pole. Um, but the story, authors talk about stories taking on lives of their own, and they really do. And I think with a story like that and a location like that, it was always going to be about isolation and about people being desperate and about people doing awful things. I think in your second draft and your third draft, that's when you really dive into those themes and those ideas and bring them out. So yeah, I'm not sure it really was a case of I went into it thinking I want to write a very serious novel about the idea of isolation. I think it's just where the story went, and I then jumped on that and thought, okay, that's what this story is. Let's really try and bring that out in everything, in the characters, in the settings, in the way the murder happens, in the history and the backstory that happens before the book begins. It's about recognizing those themes when they start to show themselves, and then just jumping on it and saying, right, let's really explore that and bring that to the surface.
And also, did any character surprise you as you were writing, like taking the story in an unexpected direction that you didn't plan at the beginning?
So yeah, I think the character that probably most surprised me. So there's a character called Astrid. So Astrid is uh, she is brought along. She's the assistant of to the guys who own the airship, and she is brought along to kind of just keep on top of the admin and make sure everything is okay, make sure everything goes smoothly. And Astrid she's quite a minor character, but she surprised me because I just absolutely fell in love with her. Like um, she's kind of based a little bit on someone I met when I went to Longyearbyen for a research trip. So my friend and I went for a few days so that I could look around, and we went on a boat trip, and there was the woman who was leading the boat trip. She kind of looked very approachable and really lovely, and she had, like, in the book I think we talk about Astrid is wearing a jumper with like a walrus that's waving, and it has a scarf and a woolly hat, and she's got little penguins painted on her nails, and she has like a pink fluffy headband, and that's just everything that the woman leading our boat trip was wearing. But then during the day when we were on the boat with her, she would just come out with the darkest things you had ever heard. And it was just this juxtaposition of this woman who clearly had some very dark thoughts on her mind with, the fluffy walrus and the penguins. And I remember thinking, I've got to put her into the book. And so I brought her in as Astrid, and yeah, Astrid probably wasn't supposed to have very much to do, but the more I wrote, the more I found myself thinking, I want to write more of Astrid. I've got to bring Astrid in. And so Astrid ended up surprising me in that way. And I was just constantly looking for ways to bring her in because she was so much fun to write. But of course, yeah, you can't bring a character in for no reason. If a character's there in a scene, they've got to have a reason to be there. So yeah, looking for ways to bring Astrid in and to have her play a larger role in the story. That's probably, yeah, she was probably the character that surprised me the most.
And also, talking about characters, is there a character that you identified the most with, and you feel yourself like being reflected in one of your books?
I think I probably see a little bit of myself in Chloe, who is the detective character in Death in the Arctic. So Chloe's story is she is desperate to become a successful travel journalist. She wants to write for travel magazines. And at the beginning of the book, she is not having any luck whatsoever. It's just not happening for her. And then by kind of fluke, by lucky coincidence, she gets this job to go to the North Pole on this airship and write an article about it for a huge magazine. And so off she goes, and she is determined. She's saying, I am going to make this is my big break. This is going to be what kickstarts my career as a travel writer. And you know, she's not going to let anything stop her. And I can probably see a little bit of my own desire to be successful as an author in that. You know, I think definitely that sense of, do you know what, I'm going after this and I'm gonna prioritize it above all else, and I'm gonna make it happen. And you know, there is no room for kind of failure. Um, yeah, I don't know if I went into it quite as extreme a way as Chloe does, but I think I can. There's definitely a little bit of my own um, desire to be a successful author coming through there. And again, I probably not intentionally. You know, just like we were saying earlier, I didn't set out to write a character who would remind me of myself in that way. But as you write the book, you kind of look back and realize, "Oh, okay, maybe I see a little bit of myself in this, in what I've written." So, yeah, it's one of those things that just sort of happens.
And I'm also curious to know, like, what was the most complicated scene you have to write in any of your books? Trying to not say any spoilers, of course, but
Yeah.
like something that you say, oh, it was like hard for me to write, or like I had to plan it, or I had to write it or rewrite it multiple times.
I think there are two. The first is always the opening chapter. Like chapter one is always so hard because you have to introduce the world and the characters and get the story moving, and do all of that in an interesting way without making the reader feel as if, right, I'm going to sit you down now and give you 5 pages of exposition so you understand what's going on. You know, because no one wants that. So the first chapter is trying to juggle all of those different elements, get it all in the right order, make sure the reader understands everything without being boring, you know, without feeling as if you're giving a lecture. That I always struggle with that. And I always end up writing chapter one in about 5 or 6 different ways before it gets, you know, locked in. And I guess the other one is the moment at which the murder happens. So um, you need to make sure the reader is noticing things so that if the reader wants to, they could solve the crime themselves. But you don't want the reader to be saying, "Oh, well, that clearly is going to be the murder weapon," or "Okay, well, this is clearly where the murder happens." You want the murder to come as a surprise,
Yeah.
but as I say, you don't want the reader to get to the end and say, "Well, how was I supposed to see that clue? Like that clue wasn't obvious enough at all." So that moment when everything kind of happens and you're trying to juggle or trying to find that balance between noticing things without giving anything away, that's always quite difficult, and it just takes a lot of trial and error. It takes trying things in different ways and writing a few pages and maybe showing it to someone and asking their thoughts when they've got to the end of it and seeing what they pick up and what they don't. um, yeah, that's always quite a challenge.
And also, like, how has your approach to mystery writing evolved from A Fatal Crossing to, well, A Killer in Paradise, that is your next book? How do you think it has changed?
I think I'm less rigid. So I think with a Fatal Crossing, I before I started writing the book, I planned it all out in detail. So I planned out in chapter one, these three things will happen. In chapter two, these three things. Yeah, I worked out the entire book that way. Um, and because I thought I'd never written a book before, I thought that's what you had to do. But what happened was, as I wrote it, I ended up having new ideas for other ways that things could happen. You know, I'd get to chapter 10 and I would have my notes saying this is what needs to happen in chapter 10, but I would have an idea and think, well, actually, it might be more interesting if this happens. And so you make a change, and that suddenly changes, you know, chapters 11, 12, and 13. Your notes don't work anymore. And maybe you have to go back and change chapter 9 as well, and maybe chapter 8, so that chapter 10. So, you know, I ended up throwing a lot of that planning away. And I'm now at the point where I need to know. I mean, we spoke earlier about how I need to know who's been murdered, and I need to know who the characters are, like the various suspects, and I need to know how the crime has been committed. So I've got that ending in mind. So I think of it as a finish line. So I'm constantly working towards that scene in which the detective goes, "It's you, you're the murderer, and this is how you did it, and this is why." I always have that scene in mind, but I don't plan out the rest of the book anymore. I just set off writing and just try and find the most interesting and most entertaining way of taking my characters to that ending. So I think, how has my process changed? I think I'm more willing to just go with things and to try things, and maybe I'll write a chapter in 3 or 4 different ways and see which feels the most interesting. Or if I have an idea halfway through the book that is really interesting but actually means rewriting quite a lot of things, then I'm happier to do that. So yeah, I'm much happier to just go with things now. I think I trust myself a little bit more to do it. I trust myself to kind of get to the end and make it all work. And yeah, so that's probably the biggest change.
And also, how have you been able to like balance these classic influences of crime writing with, this modern twist to your stories? How have you been able to do that?
I really enjoy doing that. I really, I think, again, we were saying earlier, I think the reason murder mysteries and whodunits have lasted and are still so popular is because you can take the basic structure of a murder mystery, lots of suspects, lots of clues, big reveal at the end. You can take it, and I think you can apply it to just about any location, any period in time, any genre. And it's what makes it so fun, I think, to write these things is, looking at crazy locations like an airship over the North Pole and saying, right, how can I make this work? Um, so yeah, I think that's part of the fun. It's part of the challenge. It's one of the reasons I enjoy writing these things. And as for looking at a modern setting specifically, um, I again, we said earlier about looking for ways to update it. So it's not about finding a scrap of a letter in a fireplace that someone has tried to burn. It's about seeing half of a WhatsApp message on someone's phone before it disappears. I love looking for ways of doing that and just sort of taking the things that Agatha Christie did and thinking, okay, how can I apply that to a modern setting with social media and technology and CCTV and and modern themes as well, exploring modern themes. Definitely the Arctic, the a big theme is the environment. There's a lot of talk about how the airship is lifted by helium, but it's not a non-renewable. It's a non-renewable resource. So, should the airship be lifted by helium? There's a lot of discussion of that. There's a bit of discussion about how we can see in the North Pole glaciers are melting, the ice is melting. So, yeah, I enjoy using it as well as a vehicle to explore those kind of themes that maybe weren't as pressing when Agatha Christie was writing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really love taking murder mysteries and trying to do something modern with them or do something different with them. I think the possibilities are endless, and it's a good time to be writing them, and it's a good time to be reading them as well.
Yeah, and also, if you could imagine death in the Arctic being adapted to the screen, for example, how would you envision this story? Like as a like claustrophobic thriller, more even like a survival drama? How would you envision this adaptation to the screen, for example?
Well, I think first and foremost, it has to be a murder mystery.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, but I could definitely see it being having elements of a thriller. It is dark in places. There are lots of desperate people, very frightened people, doing terrible things on the airship. So I don't know if I would see it as a survival thriller as such, because I mean, not wanting to go into spoilers, the airship doesn't crash. They aren't sort of stuck on the ground somewhere. They know they are going to get back to civilization. It's just they have to wait about 24 hours before they can get back. So Yeah, I think I could definitely see it working as a thriller. Um, but I think it's very important that first and foremost it would feel like a murder mystery. Yeah.
Yeah, and like the last question will be, can you share anything about what you're working on next besides A Killer in Paradise that will be published next year in English? But is there anything else you are working on now, right now?
Yeah, so I'm working on book number 6 right now, and I probably shouldn't say too much about it, but I think I can say that it's set in Egypt.
Oh,
So yeah,
that's
so
nice.
I realized I haven't done a desert. So I thought I've done a European castle, I've done the North Pole. Killer in Paradise is set in the rainforest, but I haven't done something in the desert yet. So yes, so I'm working on something that's set in Egypt at the moment and having a lot of fun with it.
Thank you so much, Tom, for answering all of our questions. And all I can say is that there is no doubt that with each of new release of your books, you have been solidifying your place as one of the leading figures in modern mystery writing. And we are really excited to announce that we will also be publishing in Spanish Fatal Crossing, The Murder Game, and A Killer in Paradise as well. So we will have all of your books until now. So we are really excited, and we are sure that for anyone that has already read your books, Asesinato en el lago de Garda and Muerte en el Ártico, we're sure that the rest of them, they will enjoy them as much. So thank you so much for writing them.
Thank you. No, thank you. That is yeah, very exciting news. I hope our Spanish readers enjoy them.
I'm sure they will. Thank you so much.
Thank you.